The song starts out with a little melody played by a stepper motor. If you look up stepper motor music on YouTube, you'll see people have really taken this idea to the extreme. I'm just using a little Arduino with their stepper motor kit. We can make it play music because we can control the speed that the motor steps from one discrete position to another. That's sort of what's unique about stepper motors. To make them turn, you just send them a signal to slightly rotate, and if you want the motor to run faster, you just keep on sending that same signal, but faster. So all we need to do is write a script that sends the signal to move at the same frequency as the note that we want to be played, because every time it moves a little bit, it makes a little sound. You have to do a little compensation for some system delays, but really there's not much more to it than that. The drums that back up the stepper motor come from a couple different sources, electronics kind of stuff. The kick drum is the pop of a speaker when you connect a cable, and I edited some radio static to mimic the volume curve and frequency composition of a snare. I was scanning through stations as I did that, so you might be able to hear faint traces of people's voices each time the snare hits. Then there's some other miscellaneous sounds from electronics equipment that I threw in for flavor. After harmonizing the stepper motor, the vocals start with DECtalk singing.
The second modern day. She found it love music not and also leave a bouquet.
DECtalk is this text-to-speech module from the 80s that's mostly famous for its role as Stephen Hawking's voice. I wouldn't expect anyone to know this, but this is not actually what DECtalk sounds like when it sings. You can program DECtalk to sing, but it sounds a lot more theatrical, and for this I wanted a more straightforward delivery.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, John Madden. Happy birthday to you.
So to do that, I actually used a vocal synthesis program called UTAU. Someone from the UTAU community made a voice bank for DECtalk, so whoever did that, thank you. I'll talk more about UTAU in a later video where it plays more of a starring role, but I'll just say that it's one of those weird corners of the internet that kinda leaves you baffled. I definitely recommend checking it out. Anyway, all of the sounds have been pretty dry up until now, so I apply some strings for moisture. These aren't normal strings, though. This is actually me singing every part of a string section and then converting my voice into my great-uncle's violin using this plugin. I'll explain how this plugin works in another video, but I'll just say this. It sounds so nice to play every part of a string section because, in my head I think, singing every part will give the strings a human touch and it'll bring all those nuances and artifacts that make music sound beautiful and immersive. It's such a nice idea. But in reality, it was a ton of work. I mean, string sections are big. I do really like how it turned out, though. It doesn't sound like a real string section, but it doesn't sound like the fake strings we're all used to, either. It's a new artificial string sound, and personally, I think it fits pretty well into Operaville's sci-fi sound. Too bad it was so labor-intensive because I'll probably never do it again. But I will release an isolated track for it, so you can at least appreciate what little of it will be made. So as the first verse continues, I start to add in more instruments and build the momentum. I also introduce a new robot voice.
She's a damsel, she's bizarre. Got an swell. I know you're not in love, but you could say that's strange.
This is just what it sounds like when I sing through an audio plugin called BitSpeak. BitSpeak is a real-time pitch-excited linear prediction codec. That is really fancy sounding, and honestly, I haven't really looked into it too much. I just know that linear predictive coding is related to how your voice is compressed over the phone, and it was used in the Speak and Spell toy from the 80s. Anyway, as the verse transitions to the chorus, we get a quick taste of the AI choir, which I would call the centerpiece of this song. I used an online service called Respeecher, which you actually might have heard before if you've seen The Mandalorian. Respeecher is actually responsible for the voice of a young Luke Skywalker. The way it works is you record yourself reading a paragraph, and Respeecher analyzes your voice and maps it to another voice using AI. It does a pretty great job at turning one voice into another, but I did notice it was missing some high-frequency information, which you might hear is missing from the AI choir. Here is my wild guess as to why that is. I think maybe the sample rate was reduced when the neural network encoded the data to a lower dimensionality layer. I'm not really an AI guy, but that's my armchair theory for where the high frequencies went. I accepted the lack of high frequencies as one of the artifacts that make the choir sound artificial, but I don't think that would fly if you were trying to make a realistic choir. I was going to talk a little bit about my thoughts on AI art here, but it turns out it's kind of complicated and I have a lot of things that I could say, so I think I'm going to save that for another time. Anyway, the first chorus hits and I spotlight my interferometer. This might be my favorite instrument on the album, and if you'd like to learn more, I'll make a separate video for that. It's based on a physics experiment that's actually really important historically, and the actual science behind it is pretty mind-blowing too. Anyway, the vocals during the chorus are layered a bunch of times, and I threw a vocoder in there to give it that sci-fi sound.
Hot to hot, baby. Blow me off, baby. I could lose a game, come tease me.
There's actually, I think, 6 different types of voices on this song. There's DECtalk, BitSpeak, the AI choir, my own vocals, Vocoder, and my wife comes in and sings a little bit too. I'll make an isolated track video so you can hear how all of that fits together. It might be the most interesting vocals I've done. Actually, this might be the best song on the best album that I ever do. I sort of feel that way, which is weird to say out loud. I don't think this album's going to find a very big audience, but it did feel like I was making the best thing that I'll ever make. That sounds kind of depressing, but actually I feel really comfortable with that idea, and I don't really know why. Anyway, after the first chorus, I kind of linger on the last chord, and you can hear my interpretation of the classic synth sound that you hear in some 80s songs. My version includes me blowing into this copper pipe and then asking my wife to sing the actual part. I do a little tease with an instrument that will be doing a solo later, and then we head into the second verse. The stepper motor has now taken over the role of playing bass, whereas before my Franck-Hertz guitar pedal had been doing the bass. The The Franck-Hertz pedal is actually another super historically important physics experiment with mind-blowing implications, and I'll release a video explaining that too. So, after the verse, I drop the energy in the bridge to make room for the build-up into the final chorus. I like the AI choir here because you can actually appreciate there's a bunch of different artificial voices going on that all bring their own character. When the second chorus finally hits, I took special care to make sure the choir sounded as rich as I possibly could make it.
Hot to hot, Mary. Play your part, baby. I could use a friend. Come and read with me. Oh, you could be talking.
I actually used Duel of the Fates by John Williams as my reference track, but please don't listen to them back to back. So like the string section, this is also a scenario where I recorded myself singing every single part. Respeecher works really well, but I don't think it was meant for singing because it really struggled to stay on the pitch. That meant that I had to go through and correct the pitch for every person in the choir. That took forever, especially since choirs have tons of people in them. Doing that process for the choir and the string section for this song meant I was essentially singing every part for a whole orchestra, and gosh, this song probably took a year to make all by itself. Anyway, after the chorus, I unleashed the hardest guitar solo that I've ever made. Definitely did not do that in one take. I really love the tone I got, though. I guess it's not really a guitar tone because it uses this plugin that I use to transfer whatever goes into it into a square wave. So really it's more of a guitar-controlled synth. I think it turned out pretty great, so I'm going to make you listen to the whole thing right now. After that, the song jams a little longer, and then slides into an ambient section to let all that energy dissipate. For that section, I played some things through an old radio from the 50s in a hallway and slowly moved around. That's kind of interesting, but here's a little detail that I think is pretty fun. For this section, I programmed a sine wave to slowly rise without stopping. I was doing this on a computer using a standard sample rate, which means it doesn't take too long for the signal to start aliasing. For those who don't know, aliasing happens when the frequency of your signal is too high for your sample rate to adequately describe. What ends up happening is the super high frequencies end up getting converted into lower frequencies. That's actually what's happening when some guy on TV is wearing a shirt with a very tiny pattern and it gets these weird waves. That's just because there aren't enough pixels to describe his shirt's texture, and in our case, we don't have enough audio samples to describe the high-frequency sine wave. So if I just keep raising the frequency, the signal ends up going way beyond the point of aliasing, and the audio ends up doing this crazy frequency pattern. The last sound we hear is me playing with a cord while it's plugged into my interferometer. And that's it. Oh, I guess I should mention that the drums were made using a graphics program. I'll explain that in another video if you're interested. Okay, that's actually it. If you'd like to hear this song without me interrupting it, I'll put a link in the description. I hope you enjoy it because this song was really hard to make.
Hot to hot, Mary. Play your part. One.